present a work jointly with Gianluca and Carlo Barone, which is a sort of development of a previous paper where we investigated the school guidance to upper secondary education, which is what is called usually in Italy consiglio orientativo at the end of lower secondary school. We know from for foreign guests, we can see that foreign guests, for foreign guests, maybe interesting knowing that the Italian system does not have an institutionalized guidance service for students moving from lower secondary to upper secondary education, and that the only institutionalized tool is the consiglio orientativo, meaning with that at the end of lower secondary education, parents receive an advice from teachers suggesting them which kind of upper secondary school track their children should enroll in. This is not mandatory, so it is just an advice that the teachers are providing to parents and students. But we know that nonetheless it is really relevant because it is the only source of advice coming from schools beyond students' market. On the other side, it is necessary to know that in Italy we have a highly tracked upper secondary school system, meaning that there are three main tracks: lyceum, technical schools, professional vocational schools, and that we know from a large amount of previous studies that there is a high level of high origin segregation within the lyceum track. And in addition to that, we, as already Tiziano told us, there is a very high transition from lyceum to tertiary education, which becomes definitely lower when we look at technical schools and extremely lower when we go to the professional or vocational tracks. So family and parents are taking a choice at the end of lower secondary school, which is crucial in terms of future possibility to go to tertiary education, and which is not institutionally advised beyond the consiglio orientativo. So they rely very much on this consiglio orientativo. Previous statistical analysis on this consiglio orientativo, on this teacher's advice, show that it seems to be biased, because teachers tend to suggest to go to lyceum much more frequently students coming from higher educated family, and so upper secondary school choice may be negatively affected by this advice, meaning that this advice may reinforce the segregation that we have there. And this advice seems biased because teachers suggest to go to lyceum more frequently to higher educated parents, even after controlling for their pupils' performance in the standardized course, even after controlling for the marks that the teacher themselves gave to these students. And so previous evidence suggests that there may be something happening there. We do not talk about discrimination explicitly because it is possible that we are not controlling for some crucial variable in our model, such as student efforts or student motivation or student soft skills or what else. But also in that qualitative investigations came out with the same result of this bias, and also with interesting hints about what may lead teachers to recommend lyceum more frequently to higher educated parents. In particular, there is this work conducted by Marco Romito, suggesting that teachers may incorporate in their advice considerations about family resources, more precisely about the economic resources of the family. So they may suggest to go to technical or vocational to pupils coming from less wealthy family in order to ensure them an occupational outcome in the short run, or about resources that are related to the cultural capital of the family. So teachers seems to take into account the fact that a child coming from a lower educated family may not be adequately supported by parents once at school in a lyceum. We have the opportunity to investigate more deeply this topic because previous analysis showed the limits, and because we have new data on this. And the main limits, in my opinion, about previous research were that, first of all, samples were quite small or even local, and that the distinction that was conducting that analysis was quite rough. It was just between lyceum and other tracks. But we know that, especially due to the expansion of lyceum in Italy in recent years, more crucial may be the distinction between traditional lyceum, meaning classical scientificum, and other lyceum, and not only between lyceum and other tracks. And we have this kind of data in the new data set. Second, as I told you, it is possible that previous models omitted the crucial variables, such as students' motivation and students' effort. And in that, for that reason, we may overestimate the bias in teachers' guidance. On the other side, with the new data, we have the possibility to empirically test this hypothesis formulated by Marco Benito, that teachers are biased because they incorporate in their guidance, advice, considerations about family resources and cultural capital. So what we did with this new data is exactly trying to answer to these 5 questions. The fifth one is, let's say, an add-on on the previous theoretical framework. So we look at the new data on larger sample to see whether we confirm that there is a bias. In addition, we have the possibility to look at the distinction between different lyceum tracks, and we have the possibility that was not there the last time to control for students' motivation and effort as measured by the INVALSI questionnaires, and we have the possibility to test to what extent parental cultural capital and parental economic wealth may be incorporated in teachers' advice. Finally, I will show you something more, because one may ask, may wonder whether really this advice matters as much as we hypothesize. And thanks to the fact that we have longitudinal data, we do not have only information about advice, but also about actual students' enrollment. So we are able to see to what extent teachers' advice has an influence on pupils and their parents' choices. So data are based on a random sample of about 50,000 students living in lower secondary schools in 2016. We merged this data coming from anagrafi degli studenti with INVALSI assessments, both at 5th and 8th grade, in order to have larger information about pupils' skills, and with the students' questionnaires at 8th grade. And as I told you already, we are following longitudinally these students. Our independent variable is parental education, so we are interested in seeing how far parental education is associated with the first set of model teachers' advice. So there we try to answer to the question whether parental education influenced teacher advice once controlled for other variables. And the other dependent variable is student enrollment, so there we are interested to see to what extent teachers' advice influence student enrollment. And as I told you, we work with both variables, teachers' advice and student enrollment, also splitting traditional lyceums, classico and scientifico, versus the other one. These are the distributions of our 2 key dependent variables. As you see, there is a quite large amount of pupils receiving the advice to go to a lyceum that is different from classical scientifico. So looking at this distinction may hide a large difference happening there. And on the other side, clearly also when we look at the environment, there is a large group of pupils not going to the traditional lyceum. In all models, we control for these variables. So we control for sex, migratory background, macro-regions, the INVALSI scores in 5th and 8th grade, and with a control also for students' final mark. Controlling for students' final mark implies that we are controlling probably for not only cognitive skills of pupils, but also controlling for their behavior in lower secondary school, and probably for their lower secondary, their soft skills. But we are also controlling for part of teachers' discrimination, because previous results shows that teachers may be biased also when assigning marks to students compared to the cognitive skills of their students. Finally, we control also for students' age. In this way, we are able to take into account delays in the students' pathways and anticipatory behaviors. Our explanatory variables. So we will add these variables to our model step by step. Students' motivation and interest towards maths and language as measured by INVALSI questionnaire. So we have a set of items measuring students' motivation, mainly focused on intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. And we have two batteries measuring interest of students towards maths or toward language. And we will so control for this subset of variables, taking into account how much students are interested in what they are doing and what drives their effort in studying. And we are able to control for indicators of parental child cultural capital. So indicators of cultural capital that somehow teachers themselves may know or have hints about. So we look at the number of books at home, the language spoken at home, because we have this information too. Finally, we control for the economic parental background, and here we have social class, an index of deprivation based on 6 items that parents may or not have at home. The number of siblings, that is something relevant when you are deciding to invest on your children's educational career, and whether both parents are working or not, another indicator of how wealthy a family may be. So the analytical strategy that is based on linear probability models, but we conducted also analysis with binomial logistic models, and the results are the same, is that we move from model 0, that do not control even for pupil skills, to model 1, where instead we are taking into account all indicators of students' performance, scores and marks. And from model 1, we add to our analysis step by step in the next set of models students' motivation and interest. And when we add this variable, we are somehow wondering whether previous results were distorted by the fact that we were not considering something that teachers instead were taking into their advice. Then we add parental cultural capital, and in this case we are adding the fact that teachers may be considering resources available at home, cultural resources. Finally, we look at what extent instead teachers add economic information about family resources. Finally, when we read model instead, teachers' advice on students' enrollment, I will just reply model 4 with the advice. Before presenting results, a relevant problem with our data, we have a very high ratio of missing values because we are adding step-by-step data from different sources. So our sample from 50,000 goes down to 20,000 cases. That is quite bad at all. But when we conducted the analysis up to model 1, the analytical sample considering all the information and the overall sample led to identical conclusions, so we are confident that there's not should be so much distortion. On the other side, yes, we are leaving out a lot of cases, we are missing a lot of observations. Nonetheless, we are using still a large sample, and we have a lot of controls, a large set of controls that were not available in previous analysis. Okay. So results. Here you see, I invite you to look at this row. Okay. Here we have the additional probability to being advised to go to Lyceum for pupils coming from tertiary educated family compared to the ones coming from lower educated family. So for the one having just a low secondary degree. And as you see, they obtain 35 percentage points more frequently the advice to go to Lyceum for their child. This big jump is definitely shorter if you look at Model 1 when we take into account student scores and student marks. So once controlled for ability and teacher's marks that is not strictly ability but may incorporate other aspects of ability, there is still an advantage, but the advantage is smaller, but it is still quite relevant. And as you see, even controlling for students' attitudes towards study and their motivation and interest in mathematics and language, the result is still there. So we can see that our results confirm previous analysis and reinforce them, because even when controlling for students' motivations, the same gap that we saw previously is still there. If instead we move to cultural capital resources, the gap is not just negligibly different, but when we take into account instead the economic resources of the family, there is a reduction. It is still there, it is still relevant, but it is smaller. So this set of analysis suggests that Marco Mito was right to a certain extent, meaning that the bias in teachers' guidance is partially due to the fact that teachers are incorporating considerations about family economic resources when they are providing advice. And the interesting part of the story is that doing that, they implicitly reinforce the impact of economic resources on teachers, family choices. The second set of models down here is exactly the same, but here the distinction is not between Lyceum and technical vocational, but it is between classic and scientific Lyceums towards all the other tracks. You see, the pattern is identical. The point is that this identical pattern with the magnitude that is pretty similar to the previous one implies that the bias here is stronger, relatively stronger than it is when we look at the Lyceum overall, because we are here having these differences based on a definitely smaller set of students going then to that kind of tracks. So teachers are biased when they are suggested to go to Lyceum to students, and the bias is even stronger when they are suggesting to go to the higher track of Lyceum. Finally, 2 minutes? 1 minute, okay. Do we worry really about this advice, or is it something that at the end parents do not consider at all? I just show you this slide. These are the percentages of families deciding to enroll their children to the Lyceum when it is not recommended, just 7%. Enrolling their children to a high Lyceum, classic or scientific, when Lyceum was not recommended, or enrolling their children to high Lyceums when a high Lyceum was not recommended. You see, they are negligible, and moreover, here you see that they are concentrated on higher educated families. So the impact of this kind of advice seems not negligible at all, and seems more relevant for lower educated families. So conclusions. previous results are confirmed and reinforced. The bias is stronger for more exclusive traditional lyceums. And the bias is relevant because despite not being mandatory, it is highly influential on actual choices, especially for lower-educated children. And still, we cannot explain a large part, 2/3 of this bias, something that points in the direction of teachers' discrimination towards lower-educated children. Thank you very much.